been surprised by a gift they got? Okay. And you're going to be surprised by some, and you're going to return some. How many have ever returned gifts they got on Christmas? Okay. It said, I did some research, I found on the average, we will return 1/3 of the gifts we receive for Christmas. That's quite a bit. Another thing is corresponding research shows that 1/3 of the presents we receive are surprises. We tend to return the gifts that we never asked for to begin with. We didn't want it, we didn't say we wanted it, but someone got it anyway. And now we're taking it back to the store. I think at Christmas we typically don't like to be surprised. We want to know what we're getting, so it's important when someone's asked you, what do you want for Christmas? This is the incorrect response. Oh, I don't care. Because you will care Christmas morning. Now here's what I want you to do. I want you to take just a few seconds, tell the person sitting next to you or behind you or in front of you, one gift that you received during Christmas that you returned. But don't tell them who did it. Just whisper or talk to someone. All right. And the gift you returned is probably a gift that you were surprised that you got. My mother every year never surprised me. She always got me what I didn't need, and that was pajamas. I don't know what it's about pajamas, but every mother wants to buy their kids pajamas. I heard some great answers, one about people who got gifts they really didn't want. One guy got a Richard Simmons workout video for Christmas. Now, I don't know if you can even return that. There's a wife whose husband got her, get this, a year's worth of Nutrisystem for Christmas. He's no longer living. Another man got his wife a mood ring for Christmas. He says it's like an alarm system, lets me know what he can expect. That didn't work out very well. But what I want us to do this morning, we're going to look at the Christmas story and about God's love, and I want us to look at the first Christmas through the lens of surprise. John 3:16 says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believe or trust in him shall have everlasting life. Well, Jesus' gift was not a surprise because it was foretold hundreds of years before. Actually, it was planned before the world was ever created. And what is interesting about this, it's not that the gift was a surprise, it was how the gift was given that was a surprise. From the moment sin entered the world, God has been telling the world, it's coming. I'm going to give a gift of my Son. He's going to be the Savior, the Messiah. So we knew the gift was coming. But it's the way in which the Son was given that is more a surprise, and it's shocking. For it even surprised the Jewish people. This Jesus, the Son of God, is coming to earth in the flesh. And there are certain things you would expect to accompany such an event. It would be this extravagant royal welcome that the whole world turn its attention to the grand moment. All of creation has been building up to this. History hinges on this. And what we find, what we read in the story, is one surprise after another of a humble circumstance that surround the birth of Jesus. Now in England, whenever there is a royal baby born, there are people, if you've ever seen it, they're standing outside Buckingham Palace or certain area where the baby's born, and they're waiting for that announcement. All the papers printed, all the reporters are out there. There is a bunch of anticipation of a child that's going to be born that's really going to do nothing for the world except spend people's taxes. So I want us to look at the surprise of the first Christmas. Luke chapter 1:26 is where we're going to begin. And here's what it says. In the 6 months, that's referring to Elizabeth's pregnancy, and that was Mary's aunt. Elizabeth, of course, was a cousin of Mary. She's pregnant with John the Baptist. God sent an angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town called Galilee. Let's stop for a moment. This is surprising. Nazareth is probably one of the least likely places you would expect. It's not what you would think the mother of the Messiah would be found. The angel Gabriel had been waiting and waiting for God to say, now's the time. Now's the time for the gift to be given. My guess is that Gabriel did not expect God to say, let's do this in Nazareth. Because Nazareth is a small town set on 10 acres of land. One of the things you need to do when you're studying the Bible, you need to read some historical stuff about places that God chooses, because there's a reason for it. You'd have thought he would have been born in Jerusalem. You thought or in Rome, somewhere where all would recognize. It's 10 acres, Nazareth. 10 acres of land with a population of a couple hundred people, no sewage. The average life expectancy of someone who lived in Nazareth was in their 30s. And half the population would die at birth. In other words, it's not an impressive place. It's not a place where you take notice of. And I'm sure Gabriel assumed that it would be more like, as I said, maybe Jerusalem or Athens or somewhere, but Nazareth? And then it gets even more surprising. In verse 27, Gabriel appears and says, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man, Joseph, a descendant of David. And the virgin's name was Mary. The angel went to her and said, greetings. You're highly favored. The Lord is with you. Now, remember, Mary's about 16 years old. She's engaged to be married to Joseph. Now, Mary was an average teenager. She already had been betrothed to somebody. And she's going about planning her wedding and going on and so on and so forth. Now, how would you react if the angel Gabriel came to you and said your name and God is with you and you're highly favored? Okay, that's great. And you're waiting for the next words. It is a shocking selection because there's nothing about Mary that would make sense on paper. I was doing some research. I read Forbes magazine's article last year on the most influential people or powerful people. It starts off like this. There are 7 billion people on the planet Earth. There are only 70 that matter. Makes you feel pretty good, doesn't it? Then it goes on to give the criteria of how they determine the 70 people who are on the list. And here's number 1. How many people do they have authority over? What kind of power do they have? Number 2, what kind of financial resources do they control? What kind of money do they have? Number 3, do they have influence in more than one area or sphere? Number 4, how actively do they wield their power that they have? That's the criteria our world uses to determine if someone is important, influential, and powerful. Mary nor Joseph fit the bill. So, if you measure up Mary against our world's value, how does she do? Mary had no power. Women didn't have any rights back then. She had no authority. She was a teenage girl. She was poor. Mary and Joseph were both poor. In fact, that they take Jesus to the temple to dedicate him as a baby, the law required as a first choice a sacrificial lamb. But they were so poor they didn't have enough money to buy a lamb, so they go with option B, was to sacrifice 2 birds. I guess that's kind of like instead of for Thanksgiving or Christmas, I don't have enough money for ham, or I don't have enough for prime rib, I'll get Spam. You are poor for having Spam. What a surprise. That's how poor. Joseph wasn't a ruler or a king. He was just a simple carpenter. There's nothing about them that would catch your eye on a resume. No special education, no impressive accomplishments. It's surprising that Mary and Joseph, these are the people that God chose, and they would be found in a town like Nazareth. Totally unexpected. It's not who the world would pick. It gets more surprising if you keep reading the Christmas story. Just assume that once Mary finds out that she's pregnant, you think that everything would go smoothly. Under the Jewish law, the fact that she was pregnant out of wedlock, 2 options. Divorce her, put her away privately, or stone her. Today it's no big deal. Mary had no authority. Joseph had the right to have her stoned because it wasn't his. Or he could put her away quietly. She's carrying the Son of God. Surely this will be an easy pregnancy. How many women have ever said that and turned out 36 hours in labor? It's a difficult journey for this expectant mother, but Bible says in Luke chapter 2, verse 5, Joseph went there to register with Mary for the census, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. It's not how you would think it would unfold. You would think that God would somehow make it that they didn't have to be part of the census, or the census would take place later. It could not have been the worst thing. She traveled on a donkey for 70 miles. That'll induce labor. And she's in her third trimester. They say, in fact, if I was doing some reading, if you get on an airplane, the airplane requires, if you're in your third trimester, to get a note from your doctor saying that you won't go into labor within the next 72 hours. At babycenter.com, I was reading they give some advice to expectant mothers who are traveling over the holiday. I want you to listen to this from Mary's perspective, what she went through the first Christmas. First of all, reduce stress by scheduling more time for the trip than normal. Bring your sense of humor. Raging hormones may leave you ready to scream or cry. Instead, try to relax. Number 2, eat smart. Missing meals can leave your baby hungry and you feeling sick or faint. Before you travel, have plenty of healthy portable snacks in your carry-on bag, such as nuts, dried food, granola bars. Don't just carry a bottle of water, drink it. Drinking extra water will help avoid water retention. Number 3, make frequent stops at the bathroom. Rest stops. You may find yourself in need of a toilet more than you thought you would. Number 4, stay comfortable when you're driving. Be sure to take breaks every 90 minutes for stretching. None of this happened in Mary. There were no rest areas. She didn't have her little bag packed. They didn't have much food. Mary had it rough. There were no restrooms. There were no rest stops. There were no granola bars. There was no pickles or peanut butter or watermelon. It could not have been the worst timing for someone to travel that's in the third trimester. I can't imagine that she might have imagined when she looked up to God and this is all happening. God, really? I have to travel now? Some of you may feel sorry for her. I feel sorry for Joseph. This would not have been the optimum traveling conditions. He wants to make good time in the trip. He wants to get there before she has the baby. She's in her 9th month of pregnancy. So she's pregnant with the Spirit of God, and it's God's only son. That's a lot of pressure for one guy to handle. And again, he was looking around because there might have been thieves on the road that would have jumped them. I think the biggest surprise, I think, comes when they are in Bethlehem. They get there and they find out there's no room for them to stay anywhere. My guess is they took them a little longer to make the journey. By the time they got there, it's pretty overrun with people. And here, because of the census, in Luke 2, 6 and 7, while they're there, the time came for the baby to be born. She gave birth to the firstborn son. She wrapped him in clothes, placed him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. Now, you would have thought that God would have gone a call ahead and made reservations. Most of us that go on trips make reservations, don't we? Because the worst thing is to go somewhere and all the rooms are booked. You think God would have taken care of that little detail? He's been planning this from the beginning in time, and there's no room anywhere. Then the Son of God, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, is laid in a manger to sleep, a feeding trough. I cannot think of a more crash or crude cradle that could be. And can you imagine the smell? It wasn't cinnamon, it wasn't floral, it was manure. This is the Son of God. We've heard the story so much that I think we miss the surprise of it. It just seems like part of that story. In fact, we give the birth of Jesus kind of a Norman Rockwell quality to it. It was a beautiful night. All is calm, all is bright. We set up our nativity scenes in our homes. We play the music. Break out the candles. And we have the smells of Christmas, like apples, spice, and cinnamon. That's not what Christmas smelled like then. If there was one candle, they were lucky. Probably had what was called, someone said, it was a scented candle called a man candle. Different smells like slab of bacon, auto shop, catfish. Smells of Christmas didn't smell like apple, spice, and cinnamon. If it was a candle, it would have been like a shepherd's sweat or dirty donkey or camel. We talk as a perfect event that the cattle are lowing. There is a cow in the delivery room. How many of you had a cow in your delivery room when you gave birth? My wife was upset when my first son was born. I had 10 of my friends from college in there. But they were all ministers. And we don't even notice that because we're too familiar with the story. So just for a moment, think through the surprises and ask yourself the question, why? What was God thinking there? Why Nazareth? Why this poor shepherding village of Bethlehem? Why Mary? Why Joseph? And that's where I would say, if you look at this a little more closely, you find that these are not accidents or oversights, but God is telling us something about how much He loves us. And there are a few surprises here that I think we can learn from. Number one, the first surprise of Christmas teaches us that Jesus understands more than you think. He understands what you're going through more than you think He does. I think one of the reasons Jesus came in such a humble way is He wanted to make a statement of the fact that He knows what it's like, and He wanted to identify with our struggles. Rhetorical question, how many are struggling today? Life is hard. Life can be difficult. There are financial struggles. There are struggles with depression. There are health struggles. There are family struggles. I think He wants to say to some of us, or all of us, I know what it's like. I know that you're struggling financially, and it's pretty discouraging because you can't just see it's not going to be the kind of Christmas that you hope it would be. And I think Jesus might say to you, I know what it's like. I grew up poor. I never had even a place to lay my head. Or maybe He would say, I can't seem to catch a break. I always feel like there are two strikes against me. I can't get ahead. I thought last year at this time, this year at this time, things would get better, and they're not better. I just can't get a break. You ever thought of that? Ever said that? I think Jesus might have said, yeah, I spent my first night in a manger in a stable. Or maybe this time of year over the holidays, you feel like family doesn't understand you. Maybe they don't understand your faith. Maybe they don't know what it's like. There was a time that even Jesus' family did not understand why He came. Maybe you feel like you have some friends who have turned their back on you and you're just feeling a sense of loneliness. There is no worse feeling than being lonely. You can be in the crowd of 1,000 people and be lonely. Jesus would say, you know what, I know what that's like. I had some of my closest friends abandon me when I needed them most at the cross. He did not exempt Himself from those things. He lived them. He felt them. He experienced them. Why? In Hebrews chapter 4, that because Jesus had lived where we live, because He has gone through what we've gone through, because He has felt the pain and troubles and challenges of life, the Bible says in Hebrews 4, He is now in heaven and He empathizes with us. He experienced what we experience. He knows what it's like. Hebrews says because He knows what it's like, we can approach the throne of grace, we can talk to God in prayer with confidence, knowing we'll find help in our time of need. He bled like we bled. He hurt like we hurt. The Bible says He was God-man, meaning that He was fully man and yet fully God. I don't understand that. He was tempted in all ways that we are, but He never sinned. So he knows what it's like. So we find in the surprise of Christmas that Jesus understands more than we think. Secondly, the truth we see in these surprises is that Jesus cares for you more than you will know. You can determine a person's love for you based on their willingness to sacrifice for you. Oftentimes when I do a counseling for people who are going to get married, and I talk about what love is, and I'll say to them, let's say, for instance, we're sitting here as we are, and someone comes in, and I usually do it to the guys, and they take your fiance, and they hold her at gunpoint. And they said, I will spare her life if you step in for her. You know how many guys don't say a word? Sacrifice. You see, love is thrown around today with words that mean nothing. I love my wife. I love my dog. I love my car. I love my shoes. It's kind of like love is demonstrated if you come home from work and your wife meets you at that door and she says, I love you, and then she slaps you. The second day you come home and you come to the door and your wife's there and she says, I love you, and she slaps you again. The third day you're not coming home. You see, love is an action, not in words. Words are cheap. How many times people say, I love you, and turn their back on you? When Jesus was born into the world, he sacrifices, not as little as possible, but as much as possible. In fact, Philippians says he emptied himself out, meaning there was nothing more he could give. What more can you give than your life? Your life's blood. He doesn't go from heaven to a palace, he goes from heaven to a manger. And in doing so, I think he's making a statement of how far he is willing to go to show the world his love. Paul says in Philippians 2, I think of yourselves the way Christ thought of himself. He had equal status with God, but didn't think so much of himself that he clung to the advantages of the status no matter what. Not at all. And when the time came, he set aside the privileges of the deity and took the status of a slave. He made himself, notice this, in the NIV says, nothing. Became human. Having become human, he stayed human. It was incredibly a humbling process. He didn't claim special privileges, but he could have. There's a song that was written back in the 70s when he was on the cross that he could have called 10,000 angels. Yeah, he could have, but he didn't. He did that for you. He set for us an example of a humble life he's called us to live. There was a story about a guy that early in his marriage where his wife was in the kitchen getting dinner ready, and he was walking down the hall and he could see her, and she brought 2 liters of Pepsi to the table. One 2-liter he knew was old and dry and flat in the refrigerator and been there like for a week and a half. The other one was a brand new unopened bottle. He just he kind of just stood there and watched as she poured the old flat Pepsi into one cup. And when it was gone, she threw it away and she opened up the new Pepsi, poured the new Pepsi into the other cup. He comes and sits down at the table wondering what cup I'm going to get. He said as he watched his wife set the dry, flat Pepsi in front of her plate and gave him a new, crisp Pepsi to drink. And this is what he said, and this is really neat. I don't know if I've ever been more loved. Wow. Pepsi. He said that told me something about her. Because it's such a small thing, it showed him how she felt. She was willing to take the flat, the one that had been there for a week and a half, and gave the one she loved the best that was there. I say to you, as you read the Christmas story this Christmas season with this in mind, you'll find one thing after another that makes a statement to you and to me about the sacrifice and the love of Jesus. And thirdly, the third thing we learn that surprises us this Christmas is that Jesus can do more for you than you realize. We're surprised by the circumstances of Christmas because we would expect him to choose a big city. We would expect him to choose a prominent person. But he chose an unlikely place, overlooked people, and why does he do that? He does that because he can. He's God. He doesn't need all the extras. He doesn't need everything that we think is so important. Make sure we have the right ornaments. Make sure we have the right tree. Make sure all the right inflatables are out in the lawn. He can come into a situation that seems impossible and turn it into Christmas. He still does that, by the way. He can come to a person that seems like they don't have much to offer, and he can use them to change the world. That's what he does. I remember a man that I had a chance, and he's still an evangelist. His name was David Ring. Some of you might have heard of him. David Ring was born with cerebral palsy. His mother almost aborted him. He's all crippled up, can't speak right, and he wanted to take his life, and God spoke to him, and he accepted Christ as a teenager. The doctor said, you'll never accomplish anything, you'll never get married, you can never have kids. David Ring has 3 kids, got married, and it's interesting when he speaks, the cerebral palsy that has a tendency to make your words garbled is as clear as a bell. God does miraculous things. So when we read the story of why Mary and Joseph and why Nazareth and why Bethlehem, here's what I have to say. The very thing in your life right now makes it too difficult. Very thing right now in your life makes it too difficult for God, or the very things about you think disqualify you, may be the very thing that God invites His power to show up most dramatically. He's all about that. He's all about coming into the place of weakness, humility, and demonstrating His power and strength. Mary didn't look impressive on paper. She didn't have any special accomplishments. She didn't have an education like many have. Nothing to bring your attention, but what do we know about Mary? The one thing we know about her, don't know a lot. One thing we know is she had a humble spirit. So when the angel said, you've been chosen among women to be the mother of Jesus, Mary responds by saying, this is interesting, I am the Lord's servant. She didn't get up and say, look at me. Look at me. When Elizabeth, her cousin, praises Mary because she's been chosen, Mary says she begins the magnificent, my soul glorifies the Lord, that He has been mindful of the humble state of His servant. She was a humble girl. I'd say one of the biggest changes for me in my life was I finally recognized the spiritual discipline of going to God daily and saying, God, I really need your help. I can't do this on my own. I don't know what to do. Mary could have been prideful, but she wasn't. She didn't have to have the spirit of humility. She understood who she was in God's eyes. There was nothing about her that qualified her to be used in such a way. So that would be my challenge to you this Christmas, that you want God to surprise you this Christmas, that with a spirit of humility, ask Him for His help, acknowledge your own weakness. That's hard for us. We don't do well with that. We go to great lengths to hide our weaknesses. I read the most dreaded question in a job interview is this: what is your greatest weakness? That's a hard question to answer. Now, if you answer you haven't got any, that's pretty arrogant. They're not going to hire you. Monster.com says, a search engine for jobs, said if you give an answer that's a weakness and has nothing to do with your job, do it. For instance, you may be hiring you for an accountant. So you wouldn't want to say, well, my greatest weakness, since I'm an accountant, I'm bad with numbers. Wouldn't get you the job. You might want to say, well, I don't know how to use a chainsaw. There's no natural connection there. But you see, we don't like to admit that we have weaknesses. Something inside of us, and it's called that sinful nature, wants to say, I can do it on my own. I don't need anybody. I don't need God. So we're surprised at the first Christmas that we can put our trust in the power of God. A minister asked his Facebook friends to sort out give a quick testimony of what they've been surprised by God's power. And this is what they said. By the power of God, I finally forgave my dad. By the power of God, I lost 150 pounds. By the power of God, I've forgiven my husband of his infidelity. By the power of God, we have adopted 2 boys from Ethiopia. By the power of God, I was cured of cancer. By the power of God, I overcame a drug addiction. By the power of God, I overcame a gambling addiction. By the power of God, I overcame sexual addiction. By the power of God, I overcame a shopping addiction. By the power of God, I overcame an eating disorder. By the power of God, I'm sober for 4 years. By the power of God, I'm able to raise my special needs child even as a single mom. By the power of God, my marriage was saved. By the power of God, we conceived after being told it would never happen. By the power of God, my child returned home after 3 years of silence. By the power of God, my husband and I left our comfortable life in Florida to spend our retirement years sharing God's love with people in Central Asia. What is yours? By the power of God. I hope that he finishes the sentence for you this Christmas, that he shows up in a dramatic way. We see the way Jesus was born. He wasn't born in an oppressive city. And if he had been, people might have said, sure, right time, right place, looks like what faith can do. And he wasn't born into a wealthy family. People might have said, look at what money can do. He wasn't born to a family that had political power, because that might have said, look at what political position can do. No, Jesus was born to this poor teenage girl in a small town called Bethlehem, laid in a feeding trough. And the only conclusion you can really reach is look at what God can do when 2 people allow him to work. This Christmas, you may have your list made out. Maybe God will give you exactly what you want, and he'll give you everything on your list and answer every prayer. I don't know. But I hope that he does something better. I hope that he does for us what he did for Mary and Joseph the shepherds. I really hope that it's a surprise. Let's pray. Father, we come to you this morning as we come for the time of response. Oh, how you surprised us, Father, with how you decided to send your son. It's not the way the world would have thought. It's not the way the press today would have said. They would not have chosen Mary and Joseph. They would not have chosen a stable or a feeding trough. They would not have chosen Mary as the mother, but you did. And you surprised us all along the way with the gift of love. Father, I pray this morning, if there's a man or woman, young person here today that's never turned their life over to you, today might be the day they do it. Today they might receive the greatest gift ever given at Christmas. It's not what we get from our family or friends, it's what God gave us through his son Jesus. I pray for each believer here this morning, Father. There may be some who need to get back on the right track, need to start following you and start serving you, Father. You've surprised them in many ways this year. You have provided for them. You have taken care of them. You've healed them. Have your way. In Jesus' name.